Mr. Rick Belden, welcome to Animus Air. Appreciate having you here.
Yeah, I'm very happy to have an opportunity to visit with you.
Yeah, I do this thing where I just talk to myself for half an hour every week, but apparently that gets old. I don't know. So it's good to have other guys here so I don't get too schizoid, or more schizoid than I am.
Right. Well, maybe we can mix it up a little bit and see what comes up.
Well, what I like about you and why I asked you on the show is because a lot of guys, when I go to their website and talk and they discuss how to improve, let's just say self-development, psychological, whatever it is, when they talk about how to improve, the first thing I see is a list of do's and don'ts. And I'm like, oh God, that's so not what most guys need. I mean, if you can be fixed with a list of do's and don'ts, here's what to do, here's what not to do, it's as simple as that, then you don't really have that much of a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, my thing is, the thing that I harp on all the time is texting guides. I don't know how into the pickup community you are, but a lot of guys, and I think we're going to talk about what gets guys into really, I mean, okay, I need to sit down and manage my emotions, is women.
Right.
Whether it's divorce or even it's just as small as, I mean, it's just that I get questions about this all the time, but a 22-year-old guy, you go out on a date and you think it goes well, and then she doesn't text you back?
Yep.
What? That's not how it's supposed to be, and it really can send guys who've never really come in contact with, as maybe Jung would say, the horrors of your unconscious. They don't really have tools for dealing with it. And what I really appreciate what you're doing, and maybe you can talk a little bit about it, is, yeah, it's not just as simple as a list of do's and don'ts. It's not like a 10-step guide to overcoming depression. At the same time, what I always say about guys and their psychological issues, it's at the same time way more simple than you think it is, but also way deeper. Like this issue, like if you get really that upset about a girl not texting you back after the first date, the issue's probably extremely simple, but it also goes, way back.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. And, what you just said always reminded me of what my experience was like with meditation. The process itself, the actual mechanics of it are pretty simple and pretty straightforward, but the experience of doing it is where you encounter the depth, is where you encounter the dilemmas and the challenges within yourself and all that sort of thing. And I can definitely agree that it was a bad experience with a woman who really, I'll just say from my perspective, really messed me up. That was what pushed me over the threshold to start moving into that territory that you were talking about in terms of what's really going on here. Why does this keep happening? Why do I feel the way I do? Why do I feel so bad? And how come I don't know what to do with these feelings that I have? Because they're just totally overwhelmingly bad.
Yeah, how come when I know I'm not supposed to text her 10 times in a row? Oh, this is probably back before you had texting when you had a problem with the woman, but now you can text them 10 times in a row and look at the text and go, oh my God, where did that come from?
Yeah. My version of that, because I'm old, is, calling and leaving messages and then rationalizing, why isn't she calling me back? Oh, maybe her voicemail isn't working. Oh, maybe her phone isn't working.
Yeah,
it was a similar process, but it didn't happen at hyperspeed and, in terms of hyper quantity, the way that you can with texting.
Yeah, so that was your foray into, maybe I have maybe there's something deeper going on. Yeah, mine was not one woman, it's about 15 women.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
All kind of coalesced into what the heck. And then that one woman who I never even talked to, who I saw sitting on the quad in college, in undergrad. Why can't I not talk to her? That's insane.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just a bunch of those.
I had my own little parade, and the one I spoke about was the one who was the last in line before I finally decided that I really needed to do something different than what I've been doing, because I kept having the same sort of experience over and over and over again. And it was, every one of them felt terrible in its own way to some degree, but the last one I just felt completely wrecked. And every time I felt completely taken by surprise, like I had no idea what was going on. And it just, after a certain point, in addition to some other things I was unhappy with in my life, I decided, okay, if I don't start figuring this out within the next couple of months, then I'm going to do the thing in my family you're never, ever supposed to do, and that's try to find somebody to help me.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about your story then. I mean, how did you start? So you got to this place where you got in this difficult situation with the woman, then where did it go from there?
Well, that was Thanksgiving of 1986, so it's significant. I remember that. And the holidays were awful.
Yeah, it sounds like you're somebody talking about their sobriety date.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess it is.
Which it is. It's emotional sobriety. That's a way of saying it.
It's a very good way of saying it. So I just decided that if I wasn't feeling better about myself and my life, because I was unhappy with the work I was doing too, and I was at the age where friends were starting to get married, everybody's starting to get paired off, and it wasn't happening for me. So instead of partying with all my buddies, I was partying by myself, and I was getting pretty dissatisfied with that. So I decided, okay, if I'm not feeling better about this by New Year, I'm going to be open to finding some help with this. And I think it was February of the next year, I was reading a local publication, and they had a front page feature interview with this fellow named John Lee, who lived here in Austin. And he later went on to be kind of a big figure in the men's movement, as it was called, back in the late 80s and early 90s. And he's still active. He's really good. And so he was actually just getting started. He was working out of his living room in a very small house here in Austin at the time. I read his interview, and he told his story, and I said, well, this guy sounds like he's lived through the same kind of stuff that I'm dealing with right now, and he's real open about it, so maybe he can help me. So I screwed up my courage, and I went and had a meeting with him and had an individual session, and after a few individual sessions, he talked me into going to one of his groups with other men, and then when I saw other men talking about their lives in a realistic, authentic way for the first time in my life, I was completely transformed. It's like, wow, I'm not just some space weirdo, who's living in this horrible, unhappy dimension of failed romance. It's like there's a lot of this going around, and it helped me to start to get a handle on what was happening with me, that I wasn't just abnormal, that this, a lot of my experiences were common, and that there were men in the group who had actually moved forward, who weren't in the same place they were in. So that's kind of how I got started. A lot of it was extremely foreign at first. I remember I had a lot of anger, and I was convinced that I didn't. And so Mr. Lee was, yeah, I'm sure it is with men, Mr. Lee was, he was pretty, he stayed on that, in a consistent way. And when he would see it, he'd say, well, it looks like you got a little anger going there. And I'm like, who, me? What? No, I'm the nicest guy in the world. I don't get mad, Of course, I was, smashing alarm clocks at home like every week, and plates, and everything, so like, yeah. So obviously there was something going on there, but
sounds like a Guns N' Roses video.
Yeah, well, I guess it could have been. It's about the right time. So anyway, so that was kind of the starting point, was to be able to just, I guess the first emotion that I was really able to name and acknowledge was anger, and I had to do quite a lot of expressive anger work to peel that off. And then, of course, I started to find that there were other things underneath it. And it's like, oh, wow, there's a whole world of different emotions and different feelings and emotional energy and all this kind of stuff going on inside me. And I didn't even know that it was there, because I'd always taken a pretty mechanical approach to myself. And, that can only take you so far.
Yeah, we call that stoicism, or CBT. Yeah. Sorry, I make fun of CBT a lot on the show. Hope that's all right.
I don't mind.
Stepping on any toes over there.
No, not on my toes, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, what I get a lot out of that, it takes pain. And that's what I tell guys all the time. If you're not changing the way maybe you think you quote, should be changing, maybe there just needs to be more pain there. And what I'm getting from November of 1986, Thanksgiving 1986 to New Year's is you were, things weren't going that well. Whatever it took you to go to this guy, this weird men's movement guy, to ask for help. I don't know how into the men's movement he was. Did he get dressed up in a loincloth and dance around a fire or something at night? I know it got pretty weird there for a while.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how it was characterized in the popular culture, and I'm sure there was a certain amount of that. I didn't get involved in any of that. But no, he was very influenced by a lot of the things that Robert Bly wrote. And this is, Robert Bly had a big New York Times bestseller called Iron John back in, I think, 1990 or something like that. So this was like a few years before that. So all of this stuff was kind of percolating under the surface. But it was certainly about how can you be present with your emotions. That was a big, big part of it. And then being in the groups of other men is like, can you be present with your emotions with other men? Can you be present with other men who are having their own emotions? Because that was something else I'd never experienced before. And I'd certainly, especially as a child, when men were emotional around me, it was like, you better get under the table because something bad is going to happen.
Yeah,
so
right.
I think the core of the experience was being real, with how we were feeling in the moment. And also having that experience of witnessing and supporting other men doing the same thing. And honestly, Mark, I mean, when I first started expressing anger physically, therapeutically, it was frightening. I was like, man, I went from I don't have any anger at all to if I let any of it out, I'm going to destroy the whole house.
Yeah.
And I think that was a common experience too. And it was also challenging to see other men do that work, get really physical and, express their anger in a safe way with beating a pillow or like taking a plastic bat and like smashing, something that wouldn't break, and that kind of stuff. And I mean, some of these guys would get ferocious. It's like, holy cow, man, that's scary. But it was part of that coming to, a place where it's like, yeah, you can actually feel these things and nobody gets hurt, Yeah,
that's the identification. And if we're talking about transformation or even what gets us into the process of transformation, it's identification.
Mm-hmm.
It's, this isn't just me. This is other people. And as Jung says, the more personal a problem is, the more universal it is.
Yes.
Whatever your deepest, darkest thing is, that's what everybody has. The thing that you don't think anybody else has. No, that's the one thing I can almost guarantee that everybody has.
Right.
And when it comes to anger, yeah. I have not come across one guy who isn't angry.
Yep.
We are all angry.
Yep.
All the time. And it's just about how comfortable can you be with it. Like what I tell guys is how well can you get your neurology adjusted to it? And that's really what you're doing. And I'm sure that's what your experience when you started to express anger for the first time is your neurology just couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
So either you had to shut it away or fly off the handle and you don't know what was going to happen.
Right.
But both responses are the same thing of being unable to handle the anger.
Yep. Yeah. And also that feeling, and, we're going to talk about another thing in a moment that just come to mind that like is kind of, I think for a lot of men it's underneath that. It was for me. But I had this fear that if I opened up that valve and let that anger move, it would never stop. It felt like there was no end to it. That was another inhibitor for me because, I guess the two big inhibitors were, either I'm going to hurt myself or hurt somebody else, or I'll just turn into the Hulk and I'll never be able to revert back. I had to learn through experience that neither one of those things was true.
Yeah. Well, there's also no model for it. And that's another thing you get through listening to other people's experiences, not just recognizing it in you, but understanding that, this is a way to do it. This is a way to express my anger. I mean, like you said, you may have never even seen up until that point in your life. I mean, I don't know, you tell me, but you've never seen a guy express anger in a healthy way. Usually what it looks like, people are surprised. It doesn't look like anger at all, or what we typically call anger. It looks like some guy kind of being nice, actually.
Yeah, actually it does a lot of the time. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And I was guilty of that. I mean, when you talk about like, I think a lot of it for me was beginning to assume some personal responsibility for the things that were in quotes happening to me, in my life.
Yeah.
I felt like I was just being acted upon by other people. And I could not see that, I needed to have a concept of myself as being a very nice guy, because I didn't know how to be able to sit with and be with and integrate things that felt like things I had been taught were negative, especially negative about men. So for me, I was always the victim. It's like, well, why do I always get left? You know, and years later, I can look at it and go, well, one of the reasons I got left is because I was already ready to go myself, but I didn't want to be the bad guy who got blamed for ending it. So that's not really being very nice after all.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I mean, it comes down to expressing your anger, getting your needs met, as I call it. That's the expression of your anger. And if you can't do that, if you can't be that honest with people, especially in a relationship with a woman, then how is she ever going to be able to trust you? And what does that do to her? To put her in a relationship with a guy she can't trust?
Yep.
It's actually one of the meanest things you could possibly do.
It is. And it's like, I wasn't even aware I was doing it. And, I have to admit, I'm in a very nice relationship right now, and I'm still working on this, because there's a part of me that is still convinced that if I'm honest about what I need, that I'm going to be rejected and left. And it's a difficult, I'm 60. It's a difficult thing to admit, as a 60-year-old man, but that's the truth of it, is that, that whatever the conditioning is that I took in, is, to some level is still active, even though I've been actively working on it, and I'm far more conscious of it now. But it's kind of, I guess that's sort of a way of saying, from where I was in November 1986 to where I am now, I'm able to take a lot more responsibility for the things that happen, again in quotes, in my relationships. I was completely mystified, at the beginning of this process. I'm substantially less mystified now, but that doesn't mean that I've completely, resolved everything and cleared it all out.
Yeah. Well, that's good. There's always more challenge there.
Yeah.
There's always more. I mean, look, there's always going to be a new situation when your girlfriend does something and you just kind of slink away from it and you go, oh, I'm just going to avoid that. That's not that big of a deal. But then 5 minutes later, you go, wait a minute. If I let that go, in 6 months, it's going to be me walking on eggshells.
Right.
And that's not a real relationship.
Right.
So I'm conscious of this now. So now I'm going to go and start this fight that I know it's going to last 3.5 days, but I also know we don't have a relationship without this fight. Right.
And I actually watched your video yesterday about making decisions. And I think some of that is coming up for me right now, because one of the things I still have an issue with this is I don't want to make a mistake in a relationship. And as you said, paraphrasing in your video about decisions, if you never make a mistake, you're never going to get anywhere, because it's just inevitable that you're going to make mistakes. And sometimes it's a good idea to feel like, well, I'm not sure this is the right thing to do, but do it anyway, because at least you'll get some feedback, at least you'll get some more experience. At least you will have tried something different.
And you're going to feel better. I mean, even if you're making mistakes, it feels way better than doing nothing. I know from experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Messing stuff up actually feels pretty good, because at least you're out there and trying something.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of people get gridlocked. They just, and I've suffered from it myself.
Yeah.
So the other thing I wanted to bring up that was really important, that started very early in these first experiences in these men's groups, was the whole idea of the importance for men of being able to understand and be with and express and process and live through the grief that they have. I remember when that was first brought up, I had basically the dictionary definition understanding of what grief was. But again, I had never seen any adult male, or I don't know if I saw any adults around me as a child really grieving anything. Everybody just kind of hid everything, or they didn't do it at all. So that was a very foreign concept to me. And it took me a lot of years to get to the point where I actually had an experiential understanding of what that was. And I looked at the ability to feel and process and express and get to some level of completion with the grief that you have in life as a man as a gateway to actually being a fully mature man. I don't think you can get there if you're not able to do that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, why do you think that is? Why do you think it's specifically grief?
Well, first of all, it's a hard sell for younger guys, because I think at least in my case, I had to live for a few years to get to the point where I accumulated enough loss that I had not actually finished with to begin to feel that unprocessed grief kind of nagging at me and kind of dogging my life. I think for me, it is, among other things, it really is a test. If you really go down into like deep grief about something in your life, in my case, I had to do it for both of my parents because I had parents, and still do, that were very dysfunctional and did me a lot of harm as a child. And at some point in my life, I had to come to the acceptance that I'm not going to get what I wanted from them. I'm not going to get what I needed. And I need to separate from that. And that was when I found that there was a need to grieve that loss. And I guess that's the long getting their answer to your question is, for me, that's the sort of experience in my life where I've really had to trust myself, and really have confidence in myself and really kind of face who I am, without any sort of, masking or any sort of artifice or any sort of play acting or anything like that. When I've gone down into those deep grieving places, that's kind of where I find out who I am. And that's, where I actually have recovered parts of myself that I had lost too. So my experience, or my feeling is based on my experience, is that until a man can actually stand in the face of that process and actually allow that to move through him, I don't think he's completely finished his process of maturation and also his process of just integration as a person. Because it's so tough, so scary, and it's so thorough, and it really is. It's like you're really not just facing death, but experiencing death.
Yeah. I think it serves as a model for handling other kinds of emotions too. I mean, I think it goes back to the pain thing I was talking about. It's so much pain that there's no way you can go forward without managing it. So it's almost like you're forced to confront it.
Yes, and it shows you things about yourself, that you would not see otherwise. You have to be very compassionate and also sort of like, unflinchingly honest with yourself in those moments. Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of any sort of initiation. I mean, if you've read Robert Bly, I'm sure you know a lot about initiation, and that's what they did to young men is they took them and put them in a situation where they thought they were going to die.
Yes.
And we don't have that anymore, but what we do have now is our first girlfriend breaking up with us when we're 20. Because you think you're going to die.
Yeah, or,
I got a question from a young listener a couple weeks ago, and he was going through the same thing, and I just said, look, this is your initiation. You never got one. This is it. Congratulations. Yeah. And it's time to work through this. And when you do, all the gifts that come through working through it you'll take with you. Self-awareness, the ability to confront the unknown, the managing of your anxiety and really working on difficult situations in your life. Now you're going to start to talk with your mom differently, your father differently. It's all going to change from this moment of grief.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think that's perfect, really. And it can, I think that, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I was talking about the dark night of the soul. And I was saying, my initial impression is that you only do that once. But I have learned, at least in my life, that I've had multiple dark nights of the soul.
Yeah, like twice a week, right? That's how often I do it.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's a level of degree there, but
is that too much?
The really bad ones, I've had probably half a dozen, and that's about 5 more than I thought I was supposed to get. And I think so much for me in my process of becoming more mature as a man is that whole idea of like, my life is supposed to go a certain way, and these are the things that are supposed to happen. And I've learned the hard way, and I guess it's the hard way for a lot of people, that like, you don't really get to make a lot of decisions about things like that. You get to make decisions about what you do, with the things that you encounter in your life, and you do get to make decisions and choices about direction and so forth. But boy, there's a lot of crazy stuff that happens. And if you're too rigid, you're just going to get broken.
Yeah. So what's your way out of that? Because, I mean, I kind of joke that I go through one twice a week. Although I did just kind of go through one the other day. It wasn't that bad. And it's not like it feels any less terrible as you go through more and more of them, but, I think you just learn how to manage it better. Like loss, as you go throughout your life, it becomes more and more severe, I think, the way that you feel about it. The loss hurts more and more as you grow old, and I think that's because as you develop and you mature, what you value becomes ever more important to you. As you develop your own identity, what you value, it means that much more to you. But on the flip side, you also get better at managing the loss.
Well, yeah, because you have more experience. You have more, like the fellow you just talked about, I think you said he was 22 and his girlfriend or woman broke up with him. He doesn't have any reference points. And that's extremely frightening because you are basically dropped into, the land of the lost, and you don't have a map, you don't have a compass, you've never been in a place like that before. And of course you're going to be terrified, and of course you need help.
I think what's really terrifying about that is we think, I'm going to have to start talking about my emotions now. Does that mean I'm going to be a girl?
Yeah.
I don't want to look like a chick. That's the most terrifying thing. Especially if you go and ask for help, I'm sure. I know I felt that. So
it's kind of amazing to me that however many years this is, I'm not going to do the math right now. I'm getting bad at doing math in my head, but we're talking about me in November 1986. You're talking about yourself and, guys in, around your age that are coming to you for help now. And it's essentially the same problem. I don't want to appear that I'm not masculine. And I don't want to appear weak. And I feel like I should know how to do everything. And I shouldn't have to ask anybody. And, it's a little disheartening to me, that's still going on. Because I would have hoped that we'd be in a different place with some of those things by now, but it's kind of a long uphill climb.
Well, I think it's because when most of us see emotional expression, it's from a woman. So I was talking back to models and how do you express anger in a healthy way? We just don't have a model for that, but our models is a woman acting what we would call hysterical. And we go, I don't want to do that. And that makes sense. I mean, that is a healthy fear to have. I don't blame guys for having that fear and saying, I don't want to do this like a woman. But you don't have to. There's another way to express it. And I think men tend to express emotion much differently than women do.
And that's a very important point, I think, that is missing in the, if you look at the dialogue in the culture at large. I think the thing that you said is absolutely missing. And that's where I think a lot of guys want to stay away from it because they feel like they've got, the alternative is I can stay the way I am, which seems to be working at some level. It's not great. Or I can do what I see men being pressured to do socially and culturally right now, which is just open up and be vulnerable. And I don't know how to do that. I've never seen anybody do that that looked like they had their shit together. So you're right. Who would want to do that?
Yeah, it's a total reasonable thing to be afraid of. I don't know. There's a lot of talk like, men are conditioned not to express emotion. Nah, I don't think that's true. I just think the way that we express emotion in our culture is different from the way that most guys would do it. That's all. I don't know. It's about being conditioned. We just do it differently. It's neither better nor worse. Women have their own way of doing it, and that's great. But and a lot of psychology is run by women now. So they'll teach men to express emotion, and when they teach them to do it, they'll teach them to do it like a woman a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think that's a problem, actually, at this point. I mean, I feel very fortunate that I stumbled into the situation that I did initially because it was a man and another man who was a counselor. They kind of worked as partners to run these men's groups. This is for men. We're men doing this for men. And so there was that orientation, and it wasn't really influenced by anything else. It was kind of self-contained in that way, and I think that was really great. I know that I was checking out your timeline on Twitter, and I noticed that you had a response to that evolve the definition hashtag, and I think you said masculinity equals testosterone plus individualism.
Correct.
Yeah. And that really caught my eye because I saw that hashtag and I looked at that campaign and it made me so angry, because I felt like this is being presented as sort of let's be inclusive and let's expand the model of masculinity and all this stuff. But if I looked at what was presented, it was basically all men should be sensitive, all men should be vulnerable, all men should cry when they go see this movie. And
they're feminine traits, yeah.
That infuriates me. It's like, let's open it up so that men can express and experience and be authentic in the way that's right for them. So if a traditional, as they say, if a traditional model of masculinity is right for a specific guy, then go for it, man. If that works for you, that's fine. But I don't like this sort of dichotomy between, well, you either have to be the stoic male or you have to be, kind of the new male who's just touchy-feely. And, that's what used to be called the sensitive new age male back in my day. And I think that's just a false setup. And I think that it's not helpful to have that presented in that way.
Well, again, going back to models, I mean, most guys just have not come across anything but those two archetypes. The irony is the more in touch you get with your emotions and the more honest and authentic you can become, the less quote unquote touchy-feely you are.
Mm-hmm.
Or the less sensitive you are. You're actually, well, see, that's not even a good way to say it, but we have this idea of being sensitive and touchy-feely, like you're weak and soft and, oh, did I upset you in any way? Oh, are you okay? Actually, the less like that you become, the more in touch with who you are and, what you need.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know about, you're in the business, so you probably know about the concept of a highly sensitive person, Elaine Aron's work. And I'm a highly sensitive person. And, so, sensitivity, is part and parcel of my nature. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it presents in a certain way, and it doesn't mean that you don't have to, have some level of resilience in your life. Actually, I wrote an article several years ago called "I Am a Highly Sensitive Man," and near the end of it, I said, there's this common perception that sensitivity equals weakness, and in my experience, if you're highly sensitive, in the kind of cultural system that we're in, you better be pretty strong, because you're going to be challenged a lot, you're going to be criticized a lot, and you have to be able to handle it. You have to be able to navigate those things, and every adult has to be able to do that with whatever it is that they've got going on.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, it's sort of like I'm trying to think about this. Okay, so it's sort of like if you had like really sensitive hearing, you'd be stronger. This metaphor is not working out. If you had really sensitive hearing, I don't know, you'd be more in tune with the environment and you'd be more aware of what's going on, and you'd be more aware of what you needed to do to protect your hearing if you're going to a rock concert or something.
Yeah, exactly.
And if somebody had to come and talk with you about ear damage or how to deal with your hearing, you'd go to that guy. Right.
And it's just like any other attribute that a person has. It has a plus side, it has a minus side. And so, part of being, like in my case, being highly sensitive means that I understand and I see myself clearly, and I don't try to act and behave like everybody else does, so that I can feel like I fit in, and that goes back to individualism, as you said. You have to be able to see yourself clearly and know who you are and know your strengths and your weaknesses and your limitations and your likes and your dislikes, so that you can be an individual regardless of what your level of sensitivity or anything else is like. And I always say when I talk about this, I am not out there, advocating that all men should, possess and express and exhibit the same level of sensitivity. That would be ridiculous. I want, to have a situation where men can be, can express and hold and be in the level of sensitivity that's appropriate for them. So, even as someone who's highly sensitive, I get irritated when I see pressure put on culturally for all men to be more sensitive. That's not the right answer.
However sensitive you need to be, given whatever your emotional awareness is at this time.
Yeah. And you're, the highly sensitive trait has a physiological basis. So it's as dumb and harmful to tell someone who's highly sensitive, you shouldn't be so sensitive, as it is to tell someone who's not, you should be more sensitive. It's like saying, well, you should be a quadruped. I mean, it doesn't make any sense and it doesn't work. What we need to do is be able to recognize as individuals what our levels are of sensitivity or whatever. It's just like being an athlete or anything else. You come to understand yourself, and regardless of whatever we're talking about, you have to be able to stand up for yourself. And that goes back to the great video that I shared yesterday about boundaries that you did. And that was another subject that was totally foreign to me. I had no idea what that was about. And it was clear from the way I lived my life that I didn't.
Well, I mean, I think we went through this thing in the 60s where we took the basic archetypes or the basic models of how to live and we kind of turned them on their head, but then we flipped them and then we basically did the same thing but the opposite. And it's not about living one way or another. It's about what do you need to do. Like I always say, archaeologists, they think that excuse me. What I always say is psychologists, obviously not that well, I get confused about my own sayings. Psychologists think they're archaeologists when in fact they're the tool makers. They're not there to show you, what's in you and what you need to do. That's why that's why I was attracted to what you had to say on your website is there was no, here's what you do. Here's what you need to wear. Here's the way to ask for a woman's phone number, anything like that. That there was no artifact there that you had to stick to. That was, here's what you do and whatever you find with your emotions and how they operate, that's what it's going to be. And if you need to be sensitive for a couple years, okay.
Yeah. Find your own level, and find your own native mode. And if people can do that, then a lot of these issues, it seems like a lot of the discussion about men and masculinity to me is like dealing in superficialities. And like you said, it's so reductionist. It's like, it was like this. Well, let's flip it. That should work better. And that's like a little kid turning over a table. I mean, there's no subtlety. There's no sophistication there. And it doesn't seem particularly well thought out to me. But again, we're back to the kind of subject that we touched on a few times earlier, which is depth. You've got to be willing to go into some depth with these issues with yourself if you're really going to find out what the true answer is.
And it's helpful when guys have a structure for that, I think. But okay, so you're in this men's group and you started to get in touch with your grief and everything. Go back to your story because I want to resolve it here.
Right.
So where did it go from there?
Where it went from there was another aspect of my experience came in, which is that I was journaling a lot, and I started having a massive amount of dreams. And I was trying to journal all those dreams, and it just seemed like I got so much detail, and I felt like they were all so important, but I didn't know what to do with them. And the fellow that I started with actually started a men's center here in Austin that was going quite strong for a few years, and he started to bring some staff on. And he brought on a guy who helped, who was, dream work was a big part of what he did. So I said, well, I'd like to work with this guy. And so we started working on some of the dreams I was having. And I started to have dreams about a comic book superhero who's very famous now, who was completely almost unknown at the time, which is Iron Man. I really loved Iron Man when I was a little boy. And I started dreaming about Iron Man. I probably had 100 dreams about Iron Man. And so as a result of those dreams, as a result of working with this gentleman who was helping me to try to understand what I was being told and what was being shared to me in those dreams, I went off on I guess about a year-long sort of personal journey to understand what this Iron Man thing is all about for me. So I went out to comic book stores and I bought all the old comics I had as a child. I made all sorts of collages and made art. I got some action figures, and I would play with them and think I was crazy. So I spent 2 hours playing with Iron Man. What's wrong with me? And I kind of reached a point with it where I was getting a little desperate. Is there really an end point to this, or am I just kind of going off the deep end? And I did some more processing, and at the same time, I met a guy at the same men's center who was starting a poetry workshop and said, bring some poetry. And I thought, maybe if I write out my dreams as poems, it won't be so much work. And so that got me started down the poetry path, and I was doing the dream work path, and I was doing the Iron Man thing. And as a result of that, I wound up writing my first book, which was a book of poems called Iron Man Family Outing, which was inspired. The title came from one of my dreams. And that's how I sort of started going off and developing my own thing as a writer and as someone who is interested in these topics. And it just kind of continued over the years. The book basically failed and I wound up with a closet full of books for about 15 years, because that was back in the old days. You didn't do print on demand. You actually physically printed these things. And then through a confluence of events back in 2007, I got the idea that, well, maybe I should just contact people on the web who work with men and see if they'd like a free copy of this book. And I started sending them out, and then I started doing more writing, and then I wrote a couple more other books. I got a website. I started writing articles, and that's the genesis of, everything that you see on my website. And now I'm doing coaching for men and women too, using my experience, and that's going very well. So I don't know how short that was, but that's basically that's the journey from Thanksgiving 1986 to today.
That sounds like we talked about initiation. It sounds like a shamanic initiation. Like, you look at all these shamans from these indigenous tribes and how they pick the shaman is they all pretty much go through the same, the same transformation. Like something happens to them. Maybe it was grief for you, and it kind of breaks them apart. And then their psychological fragments, they split apart, and you have to look at them and create symbols to understand them. Iron Man.
Yeah.
And then you put them back together. That was you writing a book, and then through putting it back together, you gain insights into the structure of the psyche, and then you share those insights with the tribe.
Yes, and in my case, I had to go down into the underworld from 1992 to 2007 because I thought this book was like really going to do something, and it turned out that it didn't, and I was so crushed and disappointed by that. That I kind of took myself out of the game and just went internal for 15 years. And a lot of things happened during that 15 years. As a result of the book failing, I went into, it was very difficult for me, and I started doing some meditative processes and asking questions about, why is this blocked? Why is my creativity so blocked? And came up with some serious information about my childhood that I hadn't had before, that I had to work on for a couple of years. And then I just had to sit in a cubicle for years and just go, I don't know what to do with these books. And I journaled, and I studied the tarot, and I studied Zen. I did all kinds of reading. And then, like I said, back in 2007, three things happened. And then it became obvious to me what I needed to do for the first time in 15 years. It's a long time to be out in the woods.
Of course. By woods, you mean unconscious. Usually what they symbolize.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly. The deep, dark forest.
That's what I learned from Harry Potter. Whenever they go in the woods, that's really them going into their unconscious, and they find spiders and everything there.
Yeah, yeah. And I've had, 2004, I had a ruptured appendix and almost died. And then I had to go through a bankruptcy. 2009, after I finished the manuscript for my second book, I took a bad fall, broke my shoulder and my wrist on my writing hand. And in 2016, I wound up with 10 fractured vertebrae. So I've had that process of being broken and having to put the pieces back together.
Literally.
Yes. And, the funny thing is, Mark, every time I went through one of those things, I was just like, this is the worst thing ever. This, basically, I guess I'm not supposed to do anything because, this bad thing happened. And then something has always come out of it. The ruptured appendix, the bankruptcy, I was down so low, I was just like, I don't even know if I want to be here anymore. Why am I here? And I spent a year asking myself that question. And I got a lot of values clarification out of that. What do I want to do with the rest of my life? What am I going to be unhappy with if I don't get to it? And all those books in my closet were a big part of the answer to that question. 2009, it was like I had just actually done my first podcast, and as I said, I'd finished the manuscript for my second book, and then I was out of the game because it took me 2 or 3 months to rehab my arm. But one of the results of that was that I really got down into my unfinished business with my father. because he had suffered an industrial accident when I was a child where his left arm got pulled up in between the rollers of a paper machine and almost crushed. And I, because of what had happened to me, all of a sudden I realized it's like, oh, I have a connection with him, that I can explore. Even though we don't have a relationship anymore, even though he's terrible to me, there's something that connects us. And that was the beginning of my going down into the grieving process about the state of my relationship with him and what it was never going to be. So every one of these terrible experiences, something magnificent has come out of it. I certainly would not have chosen for those things to happen to me so that I could get those results. But I think that, I guess the kernel of what I'm saying there is I think it's important for people to hang in there, and to hang in there and use what they get. Because sometimes it seems like everything's just getting burned down, and you're never going to recover. But I think if you hang in there and you stay with it and you keep your eyes open, for what might be there for you, you can really come to a better place, although you're not the same as you were, It's the, what's the story of, Jacob and the angel, the fighting overnight with the angel and winding up with a limp, because he got struck by the sword in his leg. I think that's why I love these archetypal stories, because so much commonality, there's so much truth, there's so much, they're like wonderful templates for human experience. It's so much better than that list of 10 things,
Yeah, that doesn't get anybody anywhere. You think it does for maybe about 3 days. It feels good, but doesn't really lead you anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I'm getting a lot from that is, this is a serious thing. So like if you're fat, you're overweight, and you go to the gym, you don't expect to just go there and learn a couple exercises and have it all work out. I mean, a part of you is starting to recognize that, okay, this is to become part of my life.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be a huge part. You don't have to take years off your life. You don't have to write books like you did. But, I think journaling is always a good thing. But you don't have to go and write books or everything. But it's like, okay, here's this uncomfortable part of my life that I need to step into for maybe a couple years. And if I don't do that, I'm not going to get to the place where I can really manage my life in a better way. And we need to stop thinking about this as a list of do this or don't do that. Or you go to your cognitive behavioral therapist and he says, oh, there's an unhelpful thought. Let's just change the thought. No, it's going to take more work than that. I don't like to call it work. It's not really work. It's just more awareness. Well, I don't want you to spend any more than maybe 5 or 10 minutes a day, however you want to spend on this.
Right.
And then you get to the place where, things are falling apart. I always say I want to get guys to the place where they walk in on their girlfriend with another guy, and part of them goes, maybe this will be a good thing. Not a lot. They're going to feel sad. They're going to feel the grief and everything, but a little bit of them is going to go, you know what? I think there's something I can learn from this. Right.
Right.
And that's maybe the dark night of the soul, and asking yourself open-ended questions. What do you want from me, brain?
Yes.
I don't know. When I talk to myself, I really just talk to my own brain. Like, what am I supposed to learn? Like, what do you want?
Yeah. And I think that sort of, if you can hold that, I think it's useful to explore everything, or to approach everything you can as an exploration, rather than a straight line from here to there. And I think there are aspects of our experience that are linear or appear to be, but there's so much going on that isn't. And if we try to hold tight to that linear experience of life, then we're going to miss a lot of important information that can inform us and actually help us when things are really difficult. I mean, I can tell you that, having my back broken in 10 places has been pretty freaking awful. And coming back from it has been probably the biggest challenge I've ever had. And it's gone well. I'm lucky. I've been fortunate that I've had good help and I've had the resources to do it and the time and everything. But one of the things that helped me, and I remember telling a friend when I was in the middle of it, and I didn't know how it was going to go, just saying, I don't know what I'm going to get out of this, but every experience that's even close to this that I've had before, the ruptured appendix, the broken shoulder, the bankruptcy, all that stuff, every time I've gone through something that seemed impossible, like it was just tearing me to pieces, I came out of it with something I never expected, that was positive, that I really needed. And that's not an easy attitude to hold. But in my case, it's been critical that I be able to hold it because it really is true.
Right. Yeah, there's like a deeper experience there that you need to tease out of it. What I like about you breaking your back is that that's really part of the shamanic initiation. It's the bone ceremony. You
Really?
take enough drugs or whatever it is, psilocybin, until you remove yourself from your body and look at your bones. And that's basically what you did when you went in and got your MRI or whatever it is, and you're looking at yourself. You're like, what is going on?
Oh, yeah.
It's really symbolic. That's good.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that I did the right thing.
Yeah. Right.
Because I just and that was interesting too, because I had really gotten deeply into grieving my relationship with my mother, and it was like this was 4 months of the most intense grief I'd ever experienced. And again, she's still alive. It was just I finally reached that point where everything kind of came together, and it just hit me. It's just like, oh, I'm just not going to have the kind of mother that I want. I didn't have her then. I'm not going to have her now. I was very enmeshed with her psychologically and emotionally, probably at soul level too. And that process of separating from her, which again I think is absolutely necessary, for a man to become a mature, independent, autonomous person. I didn't really get into it till I was 58 or 57, I guess. And I'd gone through 4 months of the most intense grief I'd ever felt. Did a lot of grieving about the entire family, because my mom, I realized, was the emotional gatekeeper for the family. So once I was able to sort of like metaphorically move her out of the way, then I was able to feel all that pain that I felt in my relationships with other people in the family and the family itself. So I went through this whole process, and I came out of it, at the end of 4 months. It's like, wow, I feel so different now. I feel much better. I've cleaned that up. And then, like, I don't know, 2 months later or 3 months later, I broke my back. So, there's an aspect to these things for me where it just feels like, you've got to be kidding. I did all this work and my reward is that. But I think in a lot of cases, it's a mistake it's an oversimplification to think, well, if I do these things that seem like the right things, then I'm going to be rewarded with this. It's wonderful when it works out that way. But I think it doesn't always work out that way. I think a lot of the time it doesn't work out that way at all.
Yeah. I think it's more about preparing yourself, so no matter what happens, you can manage it.
I think
you can at least contend with it, like Jacob contended with the angel. Was that an angel or a demon?
I think it was an angel. I think it was like I'm terrible at this kind of stuff. I remember just the rough outlines of it, but it was an angel.
Okay.
It was like a messenger from God, and they got into some sort of tussle that lasted all night long, and I think it basically ended in a draw. And I guess, again, I'm not the best reference on these things, but my takeaway from that was like, well, he survived. He had an experience that transformed him, and he was left with a remnant, a physical remnant of it, a scar, a mark, a limp. That was the price he had to pay for that experience and that knowledge and that transformation into a greater understanding of who he was.
Yeah, that's really important. Sounds like wrestling with reality. What I say is everybody's got ultimately. So
yeah, reality is tough.
I'm sorry?
Reality is tough.
Yeah.
It is.
Reality is the most difficult thing you're ever going to come in contact with.
Because I can tell you, I mean, there have been times over the years where I've just been like, why am I working so hard? Why am I doing this work? I don't have the things that I thought I would get by doing this work. And I've said this to people before, when I initially made that move in January or February 2000 or 1987 that we talked about to go get some help, I had specific things in mind. It's like, well, I want this and this and this. I want a girlfriend, and I want to have a better relationship with my family, and I was having health problems that I wanted to not have, and I wanted to do some kind of work that I just enjoyed, that for its own sake. And over the years, I've looked at it and said, well, I didn't get that, I didn't get that, I didn't get that. Why am I doing this? The thing I really needed that I didn't know I needed was I needed to develop a better relationship with myself. And I didn't have any concept of what that was, so I didn't know that I needed it. But that's the thing I needed the most that I didn't know that I needed, and that's absolutely the thing that I've gained.
And sometimes you might have to break your back to do it.
Well, I hope not everybody does.
At least talk with your mom or dad. I mean, so much of this comes down to how well can we talk with our mom and our father.
Yeah, and
that's talk about a lot in therapy.
That's another case where there's so much social pressure and there's so much cultural pressure to do it a certain way. And I know I felt that. I've had people tell me before, well, your parents are still alive. You have to have a good relationship with them and all this stuff. And I kind of reached different conclusions with each of them, but I couldn't reach a functional conclusion for myself as long as I was unable to see them as they really were. And I wasn't doing them any favors either by that. It's like I needed them to be a certain way, and I wouldn't accept them being any other way. And that's not a fair way to treat anybody.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's not the best relationship, but the best possible relationship. Whatever your mom and dad are capable of handling. That's really the key. And, sometimes they're not, and you just have to accept that. And like you said, grieve.
Right.
And then move on.
And let them be who they are, set them free. I mean, who wants to, live out their life the prisoner of somebody else's expectations that they can never meet, And I think, I think you'll understand what I'm saying here. The real mom and dad that I have to deal with on an ongoing basis is the internalized ones.
The internalized ones.
Yeah, mom and dad that I carry around inside me when I think I'm thinking about them, or when I think I'm being affected by the ones on the outside that are in their 80s now. It's the 25-year-old dad who wasn't very mature, that did this and this and this to me. That's who I'm being most influenced by, not the guy that lives 2,000 miles away.
Right. Yeah. It's whatever your projection of your mom and dad are.
Yeah. It's like, the mom and the dad that show up in my dreams that can be any age, at any stage in my life. Those are the ghosts, that reside within me. That I spend far more time with as an adult than I've spent with my actual physical parents.
Yeah, sounds like you're talking about laying emotion. And what I always say is we mother ourselves by getting our needs met, by handling our anger. And it's funny, we go back to what I said earlier about the healthy expression of anger usually looks like a kind, like a sense of kindness, and that's what it is. Mm-hmm. We don't think about associating anger with our mother, but I think that's what's really going on. And like you said, you didn't even admit that you were angry, but you didn't really have a healthy relationship with your mom, or you said you were enmeshed with your mom a little bit. So how could you?
Right. Yeah, I was enmeshed with my mom a lot, and to the point where when I was in the midst of this process of grieving and separation that I talked about back in 2015, I guess it was. I took a walk one day, and I'd been doing some work on this and some processing and trying to get some better understanding. And I was walking down the path in the park nearby, and all of a sudden, it's just like it was like a miracle. All of a sudden, I realized that I was a separate person from her. I didn't know that I didn't know that, and I didn't know that I needed to feel that. But when it hit me, I just I started crying and sobbing immediately because it was such relief. And I also felt like at that same moment, it's like, oh, wow, I'm not responsible for her. I'm not responsible for how she feels. I'm not responsible for for the choices that she makes in her life. I've been carrying that stuff for whatever it was, 58 years. And I didn't know it. And again, it's not one of those things where it wasn't the result of going through steps 1 through 10. It was a result of going down into a big hot mess in myself. That got to the point where I could suddenly have this, moment of grace, where I would just be like, have this sort of realization come to me, not just as a mental thing, but as a total thing, mentally, emotionally, physically. I mean, it just, it was like a moment of transformation. But it took me years and then some months of really deep work to get to it. But I didn't have to work to have that moment. I had to work to get up to that moment, but then the moment just came. And from that point forward, the way that I was able to relate to her was different, because I didn't have all that resentment, and I didn't feel all those constraints, and I didn't feel all those shoulds and supposed tos, and, all those things that were inhibiting me. And again, I saw her for the first time as a separate person, and that was part of where some of the tears were. It's like, oh wow, she's a different person, and then I could see her in a different way, as opposed to just being that mom that I was trying to get something from.
Yeah, that sounds like a religious experience.
I know. I'm not religious, but I used a lot of religious vocabulary for that one.
No, I think that's what it is. That this sudden realization of some truth, and maybe you kind of knew it factually before, but to really feel it on a deep level as part of your being, like, yeah, I'm not responsible for my mother's emotions.
Right.
That's a tough one. And actually, I had this sneaking suspicion that a lot of what's going on with the opiate epidemic is because guys don't know how to attach from their mothers. I mean, the oxytocin pathway that binds us to our mothers, that's very similar to what opiates do to our body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if guys can't break that themselves, if they can't break free from their mom themselves, but somehow their mom's not there for some reason, then they're going to find it some other way.
Yeah, and I would say, I'm going to venture my opinion based on my own experience and observation, and I guess being in these waters for 30 years or however long it's been. I think that I've come to the conclusion that this inability, these unfinished separations from mother are a huge, huge problem for men across the board, for most men.
Yeah.
Because and there are two reasons why I say that in addition to my own experience and my experience of research and observation all these years. Number one, it's completely taboo to talk about it. And number two, if you try to talk about it, people get upset. And I've been talking about it a lot in the last year or so because of my experience, because for me it was huge. And I think there's this attitude that like you have to protect your mother. You cannot come across as being negative in any way toward her. And as I said earlier, I don't think you're doing your mom any favors if you're not seeing her as anything other than some kind of avatar. She's a real person, and if you're not able to see her as a real person, then you're denying her humanity in a very significant way, even as you think you're protecting her and doing her some kind of favor.
Yeah, like when your mom makes you cookies and they're bad, you go, "Mom, these cookies are bad. What did you do?" Or she gets you a sweater. Maybe you'd be a little bit nicer about it.
Yeah.
But, It's like that sort of, I'm not going to tell my mom the cookies are bad. No, tell her they're bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, tell her the sweater is kind of dumb. What are you thinking, Mom? I'm not 12.
Well,
and I think a sweater of a 12-year-old. I feel like beating myself up when I wear this.
Yes, and those are kind of humorous examples. But I think it goes to the one of the roots of it, which is that, if you can't tell your mom no, then you are not going to be able to claim your power and authority as a man with anybody.
How we interact with our parents, I always say this, it's one thing that Freud definitely got correct. How we interact with our parents is how we interact with the world. And it's very difficult to change one without changing the other.
Mm-hmm.
I have found that to definitely be true across the board. Well, good stuff. Thank you for being on the show, Rick. I appreciate that there's other guys out there, and you say you're a sensitive guy. Well, I guess what we covered in this show, you don't sound like the male feminist type. You don't sound like you're putting flowers in your hair or anything.
No.
I appreciate guys out there talking about emotions and just doing it in a mature way, almost matter of fact. Like, yeah, this is just what you do to get over this. And I think it brings a different, like we talked about, a different model to how to do it. So, just for my listeners, if you want to talk about, just to finish this off, any like what you offer and what you do over at rickbelden.com.
Yeah, so I have another website. It's rickbeldencoaching.com, and that's specifically for my coaching services. So, you can go over there and kind of check out the overview on that. If you've listened to this podcast, then you have some idea of how I work. And you can sign up for a free 1-hour discovery session there on the website, and we can visit for an hour. I can learn about your situation and find out some more about what's important to you. And my big thing is like helping men and women, because I work with women too, but help people who feel like they're stuck or they're blocked, and they can't get moving in the direction of what they want, is to help you get moving. And I've had pretty good success with people so far doing that. So I think based on my experience and the things I've learned, I can help anybody pretty much who's feeling stuck. But I really like to work with men because I think I have a perspective and some different approaches to offer men that are unique. And I think that my experience with myself and with others that I've been helping proves that they work.
Well, it's an untapped reservoir in the market, that's for sure.
Yeah, and honestly, we keep talking about work, but a lot of this stuff is fun. A lot of it feels good.
Yeah, I don't like the work, because when guys hear that, they think, oh, I have to like really try hard.
Yeah,
I'm going to put a lot of effort in. It's like, no, just a little bit every day. Relax, take a deep breath. Yeah, this isn't a bench press. I know I compare psychology to working out. Unfortunately, it's not a bench press.
Yeah, a lot of what I want to do is get people, we tend to, as we go through life, we tend to drop aspects of ourselves because they don't fit, they're not practical, we don't have time to play the guitar anymore, we got married or whatever. Or, a lot of people who grew up in situations where they were traumatized, they dropped aspects of themselves because it wasn't safe to be an artist or whatever in that household. So a lot of what I do with people is like, let's reconnect with some of those aspects that you kind of left by the wayside that are still calling for you and still waiting for you. And a lot of that is about rediscovering things that you like to do that you don't do anymore. And that's fun. I mean, I come out of a blue collar background. So for me, work is like a sacred word. Yeah. And I don't know that it translates the same way for everybody. But it's, inside what I call the work, there are a lot of fun, really freeing, liberating, really life-affirming experiences. So it's not all just this dire slog through, a field of mud by any means.
Right. And then you get to the point where you can look back on who you were and go, what? What was that all about? I mean, I guess I sort of remember, but it was like this other person. And really, in a lot of ways, you go through enough dark nights of the soul, you have enough religious experiences, and you do become a different person. Change does happen, but it takes consistency. It takes going into the grief, like you say, and maybe most uncomfortably, it involves talking to somebody else about it.
Yeah, and I think through these processes, you become more of who you really are, who you really were the whole time. But you have to go through this process of unmasking and uncovering it. And sometimes that's fun, and sometimes it's not fun. And sometimes it's easy, and sometimes it's hard, and sometimes it can happen in a moment, like what I talked about. And sometimes it happens over the course of a couple of years. There's a lot of variety of experience here to be had. And I think in a lot of ways, a satisfying life is about variety of experience. So in that way, I can recommend it.
Excellent. As somebody who's definitely gone through the process themselves. Well, it was good talking with you, Rick. I appreciate you coming on the show. Like I said, I'm glad there's other guys out there doing what I'm doing. There's definitely room. So I guess we'll end it there.
Yeah, so quickly, before we go, though, I'm going to tell you, I love what you're doing. I'm really glad that you contacted me, and because I wouldn't have seen your work otherwise. And I've spent just a little time with it, and I really like what I see. I tend to, as we've talked about, my approach has been more from the standpoint of dreams and poetry and metaphor and personal experience and kind of building up. I suppose I do have a model, but it's not. It's a little bit more in the field of metaphor again. Whereas the model that I see that you're presenting is very coherent, and it's very solid. I like the structure of it. It's very clear and pragmatic. And I think that men need, and this is another one of the things I complain about when I see these issues about men discussed in the culture, is like men need a variety of approaches. Men need different approaches at different times in their lives. There is not just one way to help men move forward. And so I'm always happy to see work that is different from mine in approach and content, but also I feel like it's very complementary. And that's the way I see your work, what I've seen of it so far, Mark. I'm very happy to see what you're doing.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, I think there's more than one way of helping men to move forward, but it's my contention that there is one structure, and we all have the same structure to our psychology. Now, I draw it as, circles on a dry erase board, but it's all the same structure. And I think what you do falls in line with the structure as well. It's just a different way of getting at. It's really what you're doing is you're getting at the unconscious. You're making the unconscious conscious.
Right. And I agree with that. I think the macro structure, or whatever you want to call it, is the same. But there are different ways to represent it, and those are going to be appealing, and they're going to strike a chord with different people at different times. And again, I think we need that broadband approach, where that structure is represented in different ways, so that people can connect with it where they are at that point in their lives right now.
Yeah. Sorry, I just have PTSD from graduate school, hearing everybody saying, "Oh, everybody's different. Everybody's different." Yeah, I mean, maybe that's true. But if you take the right perspective, we're all actually the same. We all experience the same emotions. Now, what causes the grief may be different from person to person, but the grief is the same. And we can relate to people who've gone through different experiences because the grief is the same. That's why we all watch a Transformers movie. Everybody in the entire world watches the same Transformers movie, and we all relate to it.
Right.
Because we're all the same. Like the Jacob wrestling with the angel or God, whatever it is. That's why it's archetypal.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Well, thank you, Rick.
Okay.
I appreciate you doing this, and have a great day.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.